Life is sweet. Let it sweep you off your feet.
Hi, it's Allie and Find Your Joy. And today we have a Renaissance woman with us, my dear friend Mary Homer. She is going to come and talk about so many things that she has experienced and created and things she's walked through. And oh my gosh, this woman is a true Renaissance woman. And I am absolutely honored and blessed to call her my friend Mary. Good morning.
Good morning, Allie. Thank you for having me today.
Oh, I'm so excited. I think we almost have to start with the backdrop. Okay, so if you're listening on podcast and you don't have the absolute joy of seeing the gorgeousness that is Mary and her backdrop is a wall of beautifully framed photos. And I'm going to guess that those are yours, aren't they?
Yes, they are.
Yeah. And is it okay if we start there? Can we start with your photos and how did you become like this incredible photographer that just has a way of capturing moments that is just what is a word? So profound. Like your photos are amazing.
Oh, thank you. I don't really feel that my photos are any more special than anyone else's photos. They are, just a personal thing, as all photos are.
Yeah.
Photographers try to capture what's most important to them and what they value in the story they're trying to tell. And like most things that are significant in my life, um, things fall into my life unexpectedly. So it started, sadly enough, with at the age of 22. My father passed away when I was 22. And of course, it just rocked my world. It blew up. It's not something any of us were anticipating. And I lost that joie de vivre and I was just kind of going through life like a little zombie, you know,
Yeah.
yes, dressing, eating, going to work, whatever, but I just didn't have that joy at all. And I had the good fortune of being invited about a year later with a friend to travel to a foreign country, to Cuba. It was in like 1980. And it was when it was first opening its doors to tourism outside of socialist and communist countries.
Right.
Canada was one of the first countries invited to do so. So my brother thought this was pretty cool. So he said, you should really kind of document this trip. I'll loan you my really expensive, back then, film Minolta camera. And so I didn't have a clue what I was doing. He gave me a couple of quick lessons on what to do. And back in the day, it was film, right? So you didn't
Right.
know whether you took a good photo or a bad photo or whatever. And my photos really were not good. they, they did not capture what I was trying to capture.
Right.
Um, it didn't get the essence of the place. And so but it did instill in me that sort of fire of like, I want to learn how to do this. I want to be able to come back and show people and tell them stories about the places I visited. So that's kind of started my journey into photography. And I mean, I do take photos. I do a variety of photos. I do some portraiture, which I really like because you're trying to capture the essence of the person. And that's really, I think, the most challenging because people are complex and you're trying to get it on this sort of flat surface and stuff. But I love the challenge of it. But the travel I love because I love to travel.
Right.
And
Right.
so I'm just going to show, I brought two photos as an example of the kind of things I like to do when I'm traveling. So,
Perfect.
and again, just sticking with the concept of Cuba, because it's been in the news a lot lately with the power outages and food
Yes.
shortages and medicine shortages and fuel shortages, and people are really, really suffering there right now. But this was taken in 2013, so this was a long time ago when things were rocking pretty good for the Cuban people.
Mhm.
And so this is a picture of Havana, and this is the picture that the tourists see when they go to Havana. It's a UNESCO site. So you see all the buildings have been repainted, the sidewalks are
Right.
in good shape. Thanks to UNESCO, it's being preserved, the historical architecture, etc. Same city, and this is only a few blocks away because I wanted to go walking where the tourists don't go walking
Right.
and see where the actual Havanese people live. And this is their Havana. I don't know if you can see that. The
Wow.
buildings are derelict, the rubble
Yes.
on the streets. So very, very different pictures. I could come
Yes.
back from this holiday in 2013 and I could probably spend an hour trying to describe for you what these two visuals were like for me. But within seconds, you get it.
Yes.
Within
Yes.
seconds, you get it. So that for me is the importance of photography.
I have
And then
goosebumps. I have goosebumps from what you're sharing right now. The depth of the story.
And so in 2015, of course, we go back again, and I captured this shot, and it's just a Cuban gentleman hanging at the doorway of his house. Like you've been to Europe, you know, in Europe, they have those wrought iron bars in the windows and doors for safety purposes. And this guy's just hanging out in front of his house talking to some friends walking on the street. To me, this photo just totally symbolized to me, I am a prisoner of my own country,
Right.
right?
Right.
Because they have not got as much freedom as we have. And you know, you have a general election. Well, when there's only one guy running, or one party running, I mean, you know, what are your choices? Um, you can't afford to travel, you can't afford to get a passport, you know, some Cubans are now able to leave the country for varying reasons.
Right.
But yeah, it's very, very difficult for them, and I've always felt really attached to that country.
Yes,
So
you've been
anyways,
going there
the
for many
photography
years.
and that trip just then sparked an interest, and it just pivoted my thinking, and
Right.
it took the thinking away from the loss of my father and
Mm.
gave me something else to think about. And through that, I was able to get interested in life again and find a passion again, and that kind of thing. So that's just kind of always happened for me. I've had three significant losses in my life, and they've each sparked something. So
Right. And I love that um how your brother gifted you with that. With
yeah,
that, you know, you were going to go to a place. He encouraged that in you, and then he also encouraged and actually gave you the means to explore that. So I love that because now, even all these years later, uh, I know for myself when there's something that someone introduced me to, gifted me in some way, it can be decades later, and I feel them with me when I'm doing that thing, whatever that might be, right?
well, and that following Christmas, my brother and my mother got together and shared in giving me the gift at Christmas of my own really expensive camera, right?
Wow.
And so then I was forced to like, well, I better take some lessons and figure out how to use this thing.
Right.
And then it just kind of grew from there and it grew from there, right? And he was an amazing, he was a really amazing brother. Actually, today is his birthday, so it's kind of cool that I'm doing this with you.
Oh,
And
yeah.
when I lost my brother,
Today is my
uh,
brother's birthday that
is
I
it?
just that I just lost. Yeah, John. John just
Wow.
passed away a couple months ago, and today is his birthday,
Oh,
October
same
27th.
birthday as my brother. That's
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I didn't I wow. Hmm.
And so when I lost my brother, I mean, again, you just have this, because after my dad died, it was just my mother and myself and my brother. And
Right.
he used to call us like the Three Musketeers, like, don't worry, we can get through this.
Right.
And then when we lost him, I was like, oh my God, now what do we do, right? Because
Mm.
he was much older than me, and he was kind of like that substitute parent in many
Right.
ways as well, and my confidant, and also a peer as well. So um, I used to really, well, I still do enjoy reading and all that, and I love the written word. And I really got into writing when he passed away. And
Mm.
it started off with writing his, sort of like a little eulogy or whatever, right? And then I thought, I really need to write like a love letter to him and how I feel about his passing. And I just kind of did that. And then it just grew from there. And I started to write like just little snippets of little memories I had with him and stuff like that. Going to the dog house for corn dogs. I'd be like 6 and
Yeah.
he'd be like 18. And my mom and
Oh.
dad, I'm sure, were like, take her out for a couple hours. We need a break.
Every 18-year-old guy wants to take his 6-year-old sister.
So he would take me to the dog house for a corn dog.
Oh my gosh, I love that. That's such a good memory.
Yeah, but all these like silly little things, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, anyways, so I really got into writing as a result of that, and took writing lessons and started doing some memoir writing just for my own sake, and also memories about living with my grandmother in Italy when I was a young child and things like that. So yeah, and again, a very sort of unexpected passion kind of fell into my lap with that, right?
That's beautiful. I think you've mentioned this to me before. You lived in Italy. How old were you when you lived in Italy?
I was only 6. My mother had a medical issue, and there was only 2 places in the world that could help her with it. And one was in Rochester, New York, and the other one was in Padua, Italy. And so the doctor said, this surgery you're going to have could go sideways. And if it does, you're probably better off being in a country where they speak the language fluently and have family to support them through it. And so my dad took my mom and I over there. My brother was in his grade 12 year,
Mhm.
so they didn't want to pull him out.
Of course, of
So
course.
he stayed at home in the house, thinking, I'm sure, woohoo, got the house. And I don't even want to think about that. And yeah, so we went over, and my dad spent about 6 or 8 weeks there with us, getting us settled with my grandmother. It was a very small town, 1963. The government in Italy at that time was communist. And
Right.
my grandmother had a huge farm. She had had 10 children. She was widowed young, and finished raising her kids, and was still working the farm all by herself. And now she had me living with her. My mom was in the hospital. My dad went back to Canada. And my younger cousin, who was 2, lived there as well because his mother had tuberculosis and was in a.
That's right. That's when the big, speaking of thinking of pandemics, that was one that just rocked the world.
Yeah. And so she
Yeah.
is here with this big farm. She's at that point, she's probably in her 60s, has a big farm to look after, a big house because she had a big house with 10 children. And now she has a 2-year-old and a 6-year-old she's responsible for as
And
well.
how, if she had 10 kids, I don't know where your mom landed in the, like my dad's from a family of 13. So the age difference between, so depending where your mom landed in that, how old was your grandma when she was doing all of this?
Yeah, I think my grandma was in about her 60s at that
Okay.
time. Yeah.
Okay.
My mom was the second oldest. She had
Right.
an older sister. So she grew up where she and her older sister worked hard because they
Yes.
helped her look after the
Yep.
rest of the kids and all, and the farm and the house and everything. So, yes. And then, of course, she moved to Canada, and one of her other sisters moved to France after the war. And some of them stayed in the area, some of them moved to larger cities. So, yeah, it was a very interesting experience for me. We had an outhouse. I'd never used that before. I did not enjoy that part of being with my grandmother for either.
No, I remember visiting friends at the lake and we used outhouses lots, not at home, but whenever we went to visit
Yeah,
friends and family at faraway places that were more rural.
yes. And then, my dad he upgraded, to make sure she had like a decent sized fridge. And um, yeah, and then you go to school, you're being taught by nuns. There's catechism class before school early in the morning, and there you have to wear these really strict looking uniforms to school with detachable white collars that had
Oh
to be
yes, I remember
pristine
those.
white. And
Yes.
then there was the language thing because I didn't speak standard Italian, and standard Italian is what they spoke anytime you left your house. You spoke standard Italian with strangers or doctors, teachers when you went to school.
Okay.
We spoke, many people unknowingly call it a dialect, but it's not. It's an actual ancient language of Italy called Friulano. And in 1999, the Italian government declared this language to be an ancient language of Italy, not a dialect. And
Oh,
growing up in Canada, that's what we spoke in our home was Friulano. So then I'm transplanted to Italy at the age of 6, and I don't know any standard Italian words. And I have to go to school, and I'm just kind of thrown in there. And yeah, so it was a real experience. And I think what really that taught me, again, that was a sad thing in my life with my mother being really ill.
yeah.
My thought, and I was transplanted to live with this woman I had never met before.
Yes, right. I mean, we say grandma, but I mean, this is someone who lived on another continent. So the chances that you knew her or what it was like to be a little 6-year-old girl and suddenly be with a kind of a stranger and a person who spoke maybe a different language and a different culture, a very different
Exactly.
way of being. That's a lot.
It was a lot to take in, but she was the kindest person. She's my personal hero because she was kind and she worked so hard. I've never met anyone that worked as hard as she did. And yeah, she was kind of like this little town of like, I don't know, I think there was maybe 200 or 300 people in this little town. That's how small it was. And it had a church and it had a school and it had three what they call bars, but the bars were like coffee bars, right?
Okay,
Not That's what they call coffee bars in Europe. They call them bars. They're not where you go and drink and party all night,
right.
but they also are kind of like a combination little grocery store, coffee bar. In the evenings, the guys might go there or in the afternoons, guys go and play cards there or whatever. It's kind of like the town meeting place. And
Yeah.
yes, they do sell some liquor there if you wanted to have a beer or something, but that wasn't the focus of it.
Right.
And yeah, so she was kind of like the matriarch of this little town because they didn't have a doctor, they didn't have a funeral home, they didn't have a hospital or a clinic. And when anybody needed help, they would go see Maria, my grandma, Maria. And,
Hmm.
somebody would be having a baby, go get Maria. Somebody
Wow.
died, go get Maria. She would wash and prep the body, and they would lay it out in the person's home, have the wake, and then the funeral home would come from out of town and do what they had to do, and then do the burial at the cemetery and stuff. So she was the go-to person for the town, right? Yeah,
Yeah,
it was very
people
different.
forget, or I would say forget. I think that if you have never really experienced true small town, and I'm talking under 1,000, not, 20,000 is a small town. I get it, but these really tiny places and rural places, they are, yes, there's a couple of people who are everything. They're the, like you said, I mean, she's bringing them in and bringing them out.
That's right. That's right. And she would prepare all the flower arrangements for the funerals and everything else too, right? It was just, and yet she is looking after two small children, has a farm to run, and she's
Yeah.
still making, like, I don't even know when she slept, honest to God. I'd go to bed, she'd be awake. I'd wake up, she'd be awake. Like, I have no idea.
Yes, that's right.
I think she had some ever ready batteries inserted in me or something. I don't know. Yeah.
Oh my
Yeah.
gosh.
But then, that gave me my love of travel at the age of 6. I realized, hey, there's a whole world outside of this town I live in
Yeah,
Canada, because growing up, your whole world is what you see and what you experience at the age of 6. And that's going to school, going home, having your
that's
friends.
right.
And you don't think there's anything beyond that. And you don't realize that what's beyond that can be so immensely different
Yes.
from what you have.
Yeah.
And so when I experienced that and I survived that, I realized, okay, there's going to be a whole bunch of other places that are going to be very different from this yet again
Yes.
and stuff. And even trying to explain when we would go back and visit later, for family vacations. My dad would scrimp and save and take us back to visit our relatives. And when I was 18, I remember my grandmother saying, when I was born, the car wasn't even invented.
Mhm.
And now I have a granddaughter who's flying in an airplane halfway around the world coming to visit me. Not once, not twice, 3 times. And like, what is it like being on an airplane?
Oh,
Right? It was just like, she was just fascinated that we just did this, right? And in this town, there was 3 telephones. So there was one telephone in each bar. So if you had a family emergency, you had to go to the bar to phone or to wake up the owner of the bar in the middle of the night, which happened to be my aunt married my uncle. My aunt's sister owned one of the bars. And you would have to go and wake her up and say, we need access to the telephone or whatever, right? And stuff. I mean, it was just so completely different.
right.
And I had to take special catechism lessons because I didn't know my Latin. And so they had to take place in a neighboring small town with somebody. And well, there was only like 1 or 2 people in the town that had cars that would act as taxis for people. And so my grandmother had arranged for me to get on one of those little Vespas with somebody she knew, their son, and he would take me to the neighboring town. and drop me off from my catechism lesson and then come and pick me up an hour later and Vespa me back to my grandmother. And here I am, 6 years old, getting on a Vespa with, again, another complete stranger, going to another town, right? And
Yeah.
just like, okay, this is the way she rolls.
Yeah, yeah.
And yeah, so
Imagine how that shaped you. I mean, it may, I mean, you're a very courageous woman and you're an explorer and you're an adventurer. And I'm sure that those experiences are from a young age, people you trusted told you this is what you were going to do and you could do. And so you did it.
and in translating that into my young adult life, I mean, I should have had angels all around me looking after me because when I'm doing these travels, I still have that sense of adventure
Right.
and lacking the sense of common sense, right? So I know I remember we were in, oh, I mean, at the age of 50 something with Rick in Mexico. And we're like, sure, we're staying at this beautiful resort and it's got a beautiful beach and everything. But if I'm like, you know what? I want to go where the Mexican people go.
Yes.
So we take the local bus. We talk to our bell captain. He's like, yeah, you can get the local bus here, go about 20 miles down the road, get off at this little village, go down to the harbor. There'll be some boats there. You could probably hire a guy. And there's a private beach you can go to that some of the Mexican people go to. And I'm like, okay, so let's do this. So we talk another couple to go in on this with us. So the four of us set off. And sure enough, they don't speak a lot of English, so I'm using my broken Spanish. We communicate and we get in the boat. And I realize, wow, this is quite a ways away, this private beach. And suddenly, because now I'm in my 50s, common sense is starting to kick in. And I'm like, I wonder if he's actually taking us where we're supposed to be. Right? So it's just that little niggling of fear. And then he's like drops us off at this beach. And I'm saying to him, a los cuatros, can you come back a los cuatros for us? And he's like, oh yeah, yeah, no problem. Hops in and off he goes. And I'm like, no, I'm like, I'm wondering if he really took me seriously. Like, is he going to be really coming back at 4 o'clock?
Yeah.
So I really tried to enjoy my afternoon and stuff. But at like 10 to 4, I started to like peer the horizon. Thankfully, he did. Thankfully, he did come back.
Oh my
But,
gosh.
but yeah, so these are, this is the difference now, aging. When I was in my 20s and 30s, I would just like go off and everything was a big adventure. And, you know, hey, it worked for me when I was 6. I figured it
That's
would work
right.
for me when I'm 26
That's
or
right.
36, right? And, but it's a whole different ballgame when you're older. Now common sense is kicking in.
That's right. Oh my gosh. Oh, Mary, I could just sit here forever with you. I'm wondering if perhaps we could do if we could end here and do a next episode on travel, because I know you have very many stories about travel, and would you be possibly interested in doing that?
Sure. Okay. Sure. Sure.
Put her on the spot or what?
I'll try to think of some interesting ones.
Oh, I'm thinking, I'm just seeing us, we can just soar off for a while, and I know that you have many experiences, and thank you so much for the time that you have already so generously shared with and the stories. It's amazing. Your life is amazing. You are amazing.
Thank you. Well, thank you for listening, and I'm not sure what value I bring to this, but it's been fun for me. So thank you.
You're very welcome. Thank you. And to our listeners, thanks so much for coming to hang out. we're going to do this episode and then we're going to do another one with Mary. And I know that you're going to really love it and learn like I do all the time from Mary, because she is truly a Renaissance woman. So thanks for tuning in. This is Allie, and Find Your Joy. Take good care. And do remember, find your joy. Oh, and like and subscribe. Thanks so much for joining me today. If you found a piece of your joy in this episode, I would love to hear about what came up for you so that we can continue to grow the impact of this show. Thanks again. See you soon. And remember, find your joy.